They laughed at the M4 Sherman. They called it weak, flammable, clumsy. Compared to the massive German Tigers and Panthers, it looked ordinary, almost unimpressive, until it appeared in massive numbers, rolling forward like an unstoppable wave of steel and fire. What once seemed like just another tank slowly transformed into an absolute nightmare. Some even carried flamethrowers, the feared Sherman crocodile, turning bunkers and trenches into burning tombs within seconds. This was the tank the Germans couldn't stop and, more terrifyingly, couldn't escape.
Then it arrived, not once, not twice, but again and again, rolling forward in columns that seemed to have no end, an unstoppable wave of steel and fire. What once looked unimpressive became inescapable. Some of these tanks carried flamethrowers, the feared Sherman crocodile, turning bunkers and trenches into burning graves within seconds. This was no longer a machine to laugh at. This was the tank the Germans couldn't stop and eventually realized they couldn't outrun. The Sherman was born not from pride, but from fear. In 1941, the United States looked at Europe and saw a brutal truth unfolding. Wars were no longer decided by elegance or heroics. They were decided by production, logistics, and endurance. The U.S. didn't ask its engineers to build the strongest tank in the world. They asked for something far more dangerous, a tank that could be built fast, shipped anywhere, repaired under fire, and used by soldiers with minimal training.
Every design choice followed that logic. The Sherman was simple, straightforward, easy to understand, easy to fix. It wasn't meant to dominate a battlefield alone. It was meant to show up every time it was needed. And when it was destroyed, because many were, another would take its place. American factories transformed into war machines of their own. Assembly lines ran day and night. Steel flowed endlessly. Engines were installed, turrets lowered into place. Workers knew they weren't building masterpieces. They were building momentum. By the end of the war, nearly 50,000 Shermans had been produced. Now compare that to Germany's approach. The Tiger I, massive, terrifying, iconic, only about 1,300 built. The Panther, more advanced and more common, around 6,000. Each one powerful, but each one expensive, slow to produce, and difficult to replace. Even the Soviet T-34, produced in astonishing numbers at around 84,000, followed a similar philosophy of simplicity and scale. The Sherman sat firmly in this category, not perfect, but relentless. This is why the Sherman is so often compared to the AK-47, not because it was superior in every technical sense, but because it worked in mud, in snow, in sand, under poor maintenance, under constant pressure. It didn't ask much of its crew, and that mattered when crews were exhausted, terrified, and barely trained.
But reputation travels faster than reality. Early Shermans gained a terrifying nickname, Ronson. Like the lighter, lights up the first time, every time. Early ammunition storage made fires more likely when penetrated. Crews knew the risk. They felt it every time enemy fire hit the hull. Stories spread, some exaggerated, some horrifyingly real. A tank hit, flames inside, no escape. Later versions dramatically reduced this danger. Wet ammunition storage, better protection, improved survivability. Statistically, Shermans were no more flammable than many other tanks, but statistics don't matter when you're inside steel walls, hearing shells strike, wondering if the next hit will turn everything into fire. The fear stayed, and fear shapes behavior more than facts ever could.
Then came a new kind of terror, the Sherman Crocodile. This was not a tank designed to fight other tanks. It was designed to erase safety, to remove hiding places, to turn concrete, dirt, and steel into death traps. Its flamethrower projected burning fuel up to 40 meters. When crocodiles advanced, bunkers that had resisted artillery suddenly became ovens. German soldiers wrote about it later. The sound, the heat, the panic, positions abandoned instantly, not because resistance was impossible, but because it felt meaningless. The crocodile didn't just kill bodies, it killed the idea of holding ground.
Still, the Sherman was never invincible. In direct combat, it often lost. The Tiger's 88mm gun could destroy a Sherman from distances the Sherman couldn't even answer. The Panther's sloped armor turned incoming rounds into sparks. American crews knew this. They felt exposed, vulnerable. Many died. But the Sherman wasn't built for duels. It was built for pressure. One Sherman would advance, then another, supported by infantry, covered by artillery, backed by aircraft. If one fell, the line didn't break. It simply closed the gap and kept moving.
Nowhere was this clearer than in Normandy. After D-Day, Allied forces pushed through hedgerows, villages, narrow roads, perfect terrain for ambush. Shermans burned in fields, crews bailed out under fire, and yet every morning more Shermans arrived. Fresh crews, fresh machines. The Germans fought bravely, skillfully, and slowly realized something horrifying. They were being worn down. German heavy tanks became symbols of power and of limitation. Too few, too difficult to maintain, too valuable to risk. Every loss was catastrophic, every breakdown a crisis. Meanwhile, Shermans kept coming. Not perfect, not elegant, just endless. Tank crews remembered this feeling more than anything else. The Sherman didn't make them feel safe. It made them feel part of something larger, a machine that could be replaced, a system that didn't depend on heroes. One tanker later said, "We weren't meant to survive forever. We were meant to keep the line moving." And the psychological weight crushed the enemy. German commanders reported despair, not because they couldn't destroy Shermans, but because destroying them didn't matter anymore. The war had become a grind. Time favored the Allies, resources favored the Allies, and the Sherman was the physical manifestation of that truth, rolling forward day after day. The Sherman adapted constantly. New guns, new roles, mine-clearing versions, amphibious versions, recovery vehicles pulling wrecks off the battlefield, artillery support platforms, flamethrowers. It wasn't a single tank, it was an ecosystem. Wherever Allied forces went, the Sherman followed, and wherever the Sherman went, resistance eventually collapsed. By 1945, the conclusion was unavoidable. The Sherman did not win the war by being the strongest tank, it won by being unavoidable. It represented industrial power turned into momentum, human courage backed by logistics, fear answered not with brilliance, but with persistence. To those who faced it, the Sherman became something deeply unsettling. The sound of engines that never stopped, the silhouette that always returned, the realization that no matter how hard you fought, the pressure would continue tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. That is why the M4 Sherman is remembered not as a legend of power, but as a legend of endurance. A machine that proved a brutal truth about modern war. Sometimes the most terrifying weapon is not the one that kills you, but the one that never goes away. This is the story of the M4 Sherman, a machine mocked at first, feared in the end, and remembered not for its power, but for its endurance. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. More stories like this are on the way.